Okay, so thank you all for joining us. We will get started in just a moment. We'll let folks um, come into the chat. Great to be with you all today. My name is Kyle Christopholo with Churches for Middle East Peace, and we're excited to have two conversation partners today as we wrap up our webinar series that we've been hosting over these past 4 weeks that have looked mostly at the situation facing Christians in Palestinian Christians. And so grateful that today we'll get to learn more about the Armenian community. So if you're joining us, we know that some of you will be watching this later on YouTube or other social media channels. But if you are joining us live, please feel free to use the chat function to introduce yourself if you would like. Let us know where you're joining from. And then you can also use the Q&A function if you have any questions. We'll do our best to get to that through at the end of our time. We'll be here for about a half hour and looking forward to this conversation. So I'll get us started by introducing both of our speakers, and then I'll turn it to them for some brief introductory words, and then we'll get into our conversation. So we're really honored to have with us today Malkin Marizian, whose name I'm sure I'm not pronouncing correctly, so apologies. He is joining us from Jerusalem. He is an Armenian Palestinian living in Jerusalem. He studied psychology as well as human rights at the master's level and is a geopolitical tour guide educating folks on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as well as addressing how religion in the region plays a role in the larger context. And so we're grateful that Malkin is with us today. I'm also joined by my colleague, Chris Huth, who recently joined CMUP a few months ago as our our project coordinator for the executive director and communications coordinator at Churches for Middle East Peace in our DC office. He grew up moving back and forth between Berlin, Germany, Beirut, Lebanon, and New York City. He is also of Armenian heritage and has been part of the Armenian Youth Federation for over 4 years now. And he recently published an article about the Armenian Quarter of Jerusalem, which is slated to be published in the Sojourners magazine this December. So really grateful to have both Malcolm and Chris with us today, and looking forward to this conversation. So Malcolm, maybe I'll just turn it to you if there's anything else sort of by way of introduction. We've been highlighting over these past 4 weeks particular cases of the Christian community in Palestine and ways that the political situation, the occupation, the Israeli military court system and detention has impacted Christians specifically. Of course, we know that it does not just impact Christians, but this webinar series has focused on that. And so, one community that we have not yet been able to highlight through this series is the Armenian Palestinian community. And so we're grateful that you're here with us. And if there's any sort of introductory comments you want to make before we get into the conversation, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kyle, for allowing me. So you mean comments about any introduction about myself, or just in general?
Yes.
No, what you said is more than enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Please.
Okay, great. So Malkin, for those of us who are maybe unfamiliar with the Armenian Quarter in Jerusalem, can you give us a brief overview of the history of this quarter and the Armenian presence in Jerusalem?
Sure. So for those of you who are not aware, if you Google it, it will give you small stuff on Wikipedia, which is also very helpful. But in general, the Armenian presence in Palestine started 47 BC. That's the where we came here more as a kingdom expansion. In today's words, it could be said as more as a conquering power. Um, I would say, unfortunately. But in the fourth century, Armenians have started to come to Palestine, Jerusalem in particular, as pilgrims, as most might know, most Armenians at least, that Armenia is the first nation, and Armenians are very proud of that, at least culturally, to accept and adopt Christianity as a religion of the state, as a whole nation by itself. So they started coming from then. So it is believed that the Armenian Quarter is the oldest Armenian diaspora outside of Armenia since the fourth century. And it is believed that Armenians of Jerusalem are the longest standing community. This is not just an opinion, throughout the last 2,000 years that never left Jerusalem, as opposed to other minorities, which I also come from, such as Aramaics. For those who are not familiar with Aramaics or Arameans, which is confused with Armenians, it's the language of Jesus or the Jewish people or the land of Canaan or Israel or Palestine. The Arameans also are a long-standing community, but their presence in Jerusalem goes off and on different seasons, depending. Whereas Armenians always stayed since at least the fourth centuries. I'm just giving a comparison with one community, but there's many other communities. We have Moroccan community, we have Kurdish, we have Turkish, we have other than the Arab umbrella of all after the Islamic presence started post the 7th century. So Armenian Quarter is around 14%, we could say, of the old city of Jerusalem today, which does not include ancient city. As confusing as this might sound, but just in short, old city, ancient city is bigger, old city is smaller, and so that doesn't include ancient city, which means it was part of the old city historically, but it's not today, of the walls. So old city of Jerusalem has walls, if you can imagine, for those who haven't been here. Walls that today come from the Ottoman Empire, which massacred our people. But that's the ones that were present here. And I say massacred the Armenians as in referring to our genocide, if that's not clear to those who are hearing me. So yes, the Armenian Quarter is around 14%, existing throughout different stages of history of the old city. Old city today is only 1 kilometer squared. So Armenian Quarter would be like 0.126 kilometers squared. Not very important information, but just in general about geography and how big it is. Armenian Quarter has 667 Armenians residing within the Armenian Vank, we say in Armenian, or monastery itself area. That figure doesn't exist online, as it is a bit inaccurate online. What's mentioned online is that we are 2,200 or 300 plus people in Jerusalem. That's not very accurate, although it can be. But inside the monastery, 667. Outside is around Jerusalem and Palestine, all of Israel, around 2,000 in total. So it's not really in Jerusalem 2,200 plus. We are actually even less. Some are estimating less than 1,900 people. Some estimate up to 4,000. The different in numbers had come in different stages of life and of like statistical researchers or data and surveys. And Armenians are actually decreasing rather than increasing. And we were 2,000 many years ago. How, like, we are definitely less, unfortunately. But let's say at least 2,000. That's more or less the Armenian Quarter. For those who are not in Jerusalem, I would say, if I say things more geographically, it will be blur. But those who have been to the land, that you can come to it through. We have many gates here in Jerusalem, at least 7. And one of them is Jaffa Gate, Zion Gate, so you can come through them to go into the Armenian Quarter, which has a church, which has been also since the 4th or 5th century onwards called St. James. And it has 2 Jameses, disciple of Jesus and the brother of Jesus. And that's what it's centered around, that church since then. That's more or less in a very nutshell. A lot of details are not included here, but I hope I'm answering Kai's expectations or the audience expectations. Anything less or more, tell me so I don't increase or decrease.
Thank you. No, that's a helpful overview, I think, especially for those who might be watching this that haven't had the pleasure of visiting Jerusalem themselves. I know if you can get a chance, we highly, highly recommend that you visit and spend time within the Armenian Quarter, of course. Could you, Malcolm, maybe give us a little bit of a snapshot of sort of the current struggles that the Armenian Quarter and the Armenian population in Jerusalem is facing, sort of the threats that are occurring? I know that especially over the past few years, it's been heightened in terms of disputed deals or sales, and so around some of the properties. And so, if you could just briefly explain sort of the current challenges faced by the community.
Of course. So there was a deal that came up or appeared in 2023, but it is believed it has been signed in 2021. Unfortunately, by one of our priests and our bishop or patriarchate, Manukyan, with the Zana capital. That's the name of the owned company, we could call it, by the Australian Jewish, let's say, buyer. And the deal was to sell around 24 to 25% of the Armenian Quarter, including 5 Armenian houses of 5 Armenian families, a parking lot, and a part of the hall inside what we use every day. When it came up, of course, the Armenian youth revolted, especially led by a few of my friends, Sitrak and Hagop, to save the ark, referring to the Ark of Noah in the Bible, because it landed in Ararat, which is believed by Armenians to be to do with Armenia. Historically, today it's in Eastern Turkey. Just a clarification of where those words coming from. And it caused a lot of turmoil, of course. The priest was kicked out, supposedly, to the US. Manukyan supposedly changed his state and saying, we want to unsign what was signed, but that doesn't really work easily with the settlers and settlers movement. When we speak about when I said a Jewish buyer, it's unfortunately a settler. For those who are unfamiliar, or it's a new term for you. Settler is different from the word Jewish citizen. Settler is somebody by international law considered an illegal citizen of Israel, meaning not illegal in the eyes of Israel, illegal of the eyes of international law, on usually living on land that's Palestinian. And in this case, they're claiming a Palestinian, another portion of Palestine, which is in this case Armenian Christian Palestinian, if we can't say that, or some Armenians may refer to it only as Armenian, and so on and so forth. It caused, of course, a turmoil. We were attacked at least 3 times officially. All those were settlers, dogs, and more. And some of us, or some of the people who were there, were taken to the police. They were the ones taken to the police or put to jail. Some were released instantly, some took a few days, and so on and so forth. And it causes a continuous, of course, tension, anxiety, and 24/7 sitting and staying in what we can call a tent, and call tent-like situation at our land, because we want to claim the land to be ours. Because it went to court, and we tried so much to find papers that claim that we own this land. And actually, we found papers from more than 500 years ago, a taboo called tabu. Not taboo, sorry, in English it sounds bad. Tabu is the Turkish word for lease, land lease, or land claim for somebody. It's yours. And we found it as a waqf. Waqf is an Arabic word which means to freeze or to stop. That's just a literal translation. But waqf means it is for you and only for you. It cannot be sold or bought. And that's a church waqf. So we use also the Arabic word in Armenian, we say waqf, as this is the cultural lingo, semantics that actually protects us. And since then, the court said, and I say it in quotation marks, that whoever is on the land or stays on this land up until a court, let's say, a decision is made, then the land is theirs. So that's when we made our decision to stay always protecting. We still face abuse, let alone anxiety and having to switch turns, and people staying at night, and versus people are in the morning versus people keeping switching turns or like taking turns, etc., etc. And however, when I said quotation, the court unfortunately usually doesn't make decisions for non-Jews in favor of non-Jews. This is seen with Christians, and even with just next to it, if you go less than 500, meters to the south, if I'm saying it right in geography, I mean just way backward. I'm in Jerusalem imagining it. For those who don't know, they will not imagine it. We have a Petra, an imperial hotel, which belongs to the Greek Orthodox Church, and also another corruption case. Some accountant in the Greek Orthodox Church signed something with another settler organization, and they are taking over already. Despite, at the time, the court, at least one judge in the court said openly that we found corruption or we discovered corruption during this process. Yet they still ruled openly and explicitly for the settler organization. So we are in hopes of something, but this hope comes from a place where Armenians want to, or maybe we'll address this later, but want to feel this is their land that they kept for decades and centuries. And so this is the situation more or less. It's very tight, the way it feels. But of course, we connect together the way we're in the tent. As a community, it's a time where you can say we hang out, of course, and it's not as intense every second, but I mean, in general, it's pretty intense, and there's always fear of something coming up, somebody coming up, there's cameras everywhere, and so on and so forth. I hope I answered the question as much as.
Thank you, Malcolm. And we will get later to some of what you've alluded to in follow-up questions, but I want to shift, to my colleague, Chris, curious as someone and I did want to mention, and my colleague Fael has put in the chat that we do have a video just to follow up on what Malcolm mentioned, a short video from the friends that he mentioned at Save the Ark that is available for you to view after watching this. So you can save that link and watch it later. It's just about a 2-minute video. So, but it's good to have on hand. And just as a reminder, if you would like to ask questions, please either use the Q&A function or type it into the chat, and we'll try to get to questions as we can at the end. So, Chris, I wanted to turn to you as someone of Armenian heritage who's based in the US, but still feels very connected, of course, to Armenia and the situation. I'm curious if you could sort of share a bit about advocacy from the diaspora. What is it sort of like for you as a young a person of Armenian descent who is based now out of the US, but still connected, of course, to the struggle and the people? Just sort of share a bit more of what that looks like for you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Kyle. I think, sadly, as we know, the Armenian people, the majority of them reside in the diaspora. And what is modern day Armenia is only a small piece of what we consider our historical homeland. In fact, most Armenians arguably do not. Their family lineage does not trace back to the land that constitutes the modern nation of Armenia. Most of us are from what is now Western Turkey, including myself. And so, since the Armenian genocide, which, people argue when it really started, but let's just say 1915, the Armenian story has been one of loss of land, loss of heritage, loss of people. And, we saw this again, obviously, with the loss of Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh. And for us in the diaspora, it's really becoming almost the case of stemming the bleeding and stopping the loss of monumental historical land and heritage, particularly when it comes to things like the Armenian Quarter in Jerusalem or the many churches, monasteries, and other historical pre-Christian historical sites that exist within Nagorno-Karabakh slash Artsakh. And so for us, the advocacy is very much focused again on maintaining that presence. We're a very small people throughout the world. It is only estimated that there are around 11 to 16, depending on who you ask, million of us. And as Malcolm stated, only 600 plus people probably live within the actual monastery compound of the Armenian Quarter, which is one of the oldest or the oldest surviving diaspora community that we have. Furthermore, we also serve as key holders to the Church of Nativity, you know, the church where that was supposedly built where Jesus was crucified. And so our Christian heritage, our important lineage to the land, to the Holy Land, that cannot be disrupted. So from the diaspora efforts, it's really in two ways. It's raising awareness. Many people, including many Armenians even, did not even know an Armenian quarter in Jerusalem exists. I mean, there's only 4 quarters in the old city, a Jewish, a Muslim, a Christian, and an Armenian. So how special is that? So first and foremost, raising awareness about these issues, saying we exist on this land. We have been there for 1,300 years since the establishment of St. James Monastery, and we want to continue being there. And secondly, particularly with an American audience, as we're trying to do with this webinar, it's raising issues on, you know, Palestine is not just a Muslim land, which is how I believe many Americans sadly view this conflict as a religious conflict. But it's much more than that. It's a conflict that embodies the human spirit and the human rights of everybody in the region. And Christians, as such a small part of the population of the Holy Land, particularly in the West Bank and in Jerusalem itself, are continuously under threat. And that's something a lot of people do not understand. So again, we have the Armenian National Committee of America, the ANCA, which advocates for these efforts on the Hill. And so it's again, it's similar to our work that we do here at CMEP, talking to congressmen, raising money. I know that Save the Ark has a fund that you can donate to that goes towards the court cases that Malcolm had mentioned that are currently ongoing. And so really trying every avenue that we can take in order to preserve the little that we have left with the hopes of rebuilding in the future.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that overview. Malcolm, I want to turn it back to you. I know that in your professional life, among the many things that you do is being a geopolitical tour guide. And so I'm curious, how do you see the issues facing the Armenian population in Jerusalem sort of relate or fit into sort of the larger context of the conflict, of the situation, especially facing the Christian community throughout the Palestinian Christian community in Israel and Palestine? What are sort of the areas of overlap, or, you know, sort of how does it fit in within the broader context?
Of course, a very obvious question, Kyle. Well, Armenians in 1948, 10,000 of them were kicked out, including my own family. A lot of our history was also taken from here. And Armenians until today are treated with a lot of degradation because we're not Jewish. So we're treated as Palestinians. For me, it's an honor to be Palestinian. Many Armenians don't see it as an honor. And that's okay. Nobody want to be on the victim side or on the side that gets more persecution. Armenians try to hold on to their Armenian identity to feel more maybe dignified or valued by the Israeli community at the social level, which has a level of it. We might address later if that's something relevant. 50,000 Palestinian Christians, I'm just starting with a background, were kicked out of 1948. and the rest of another 700 plus thousand Palestinian Muslims. How does it fit into the broader context? I hope those comments alone speak out, because they're never resolved. Not because we're just speaking of old history, because Israel still kicks out people until today. Whether Christians, Muslims, or Armenians, Greeks, Aramaics, Turks, Kurds, whoever people here identify. I said Turks and Kurds in North Africa, Central Africa, that's all part of the Palestinian fabric. I'm not referring to the Ottoman Empire. People still get kicked out, losing houses, losing homes. Different cases. West Bank, at times, they just simply claim that their whole area is a firing zone or a nature reserve by the Israeli military. So it's taken over. In our case, it's even, I would say, on one hand, it has a positive element to it. But we're still at least not, that our land is not taken directly, like many people experience. Instant demolitions, instant kicking out, and so on and so forth. Or today in Gaza, what's happening, especially in the north. But this is how it overlaps or how it's connected. It's the same story, but it just appears in different format. Most people who are not inclined with what I call justice, humbly referred to as simple justice, they say, oh, it's complicated. So they see this as complicated. And I say it with a tease, because I challenge people's conscience. If you see certain injustice as complicated versus other injustice as simple, weird. Anything that's theft and claiming someone's land is not complicated, it's injustice. But humanity has lost a lot of its conscience. Maybe it never had much of its conscience anyway. We're still evolving into a conscience. And that's where we lose those elements of connecting to people who are the oppressed or the perpetrated against. In this case, Armenians of Palestine. Even the Armenians of Israel, some of them stand in our cause of what's happening. Some of them assimilated into the Israeli community. And just to elaborate slightly on what I mean by Armenians of Israel, they are the Armenians that came in the 90s as Jews. And they cannot come in without being Jewish, because Israel doesn't allow people to have citizenship here if they're not Jewish. That happened at least after its establishment, post the year of 1948. So Armenians who came here after the 90s, they say were Israeli. Some of them assimilated, even lost the ability or the language and culture. And so we have also tension sometimes between the Armenians of historic Armenians, let's call us, or genocide Armenians from the Armenians of Israel today. Sometimes we also have good relations, and as I said. So the overlap or the similarities, continuous colonization, just in, sometimes in different names and shapes and forms. And continuous human power to claim over another. And this another or other, especially when they don't have the power to resist back, except peacefully. But if we had the power to resist back non-peacefully, although I'm not for that, maybe it will not even happen from the first place. And that's how life works. I hope I answered.
Thank you, Malcolm. So again, we want to make sure that if folks joining us have questions, they can raise them. So please feel free to put them in the chat or use the Q&A function. We're nearing toward the latter half of our time together. I still have a few questions, and also would welcome if Chris and Malcolm had any comments or questions from what others have what each other has shared. But maybe I'll end with this question, and then I see one came in from the audience. So maybe um, I'll adjust the question so that Malkin and Chris, you can both answer it. But for Malkin, how do Armenians, within the Armenian Quarter envision their future? Obviously many are in a very difficult moment right now. Some might choose to emigrate, but we also know that there is a strong desire, in part, push to keep that part of the Armenian diaspora alive. So, sort of, what kind of scenario and future are you hoping for in terms of a durable solution to the situation, in the Holy Land? And then um, maybe for Chris, again, sort of how does the diaspora in America, the Armenian diaspora in America, I know that you can't answer for the whole community, but from your perspective, sort of how do you also sort of see and envision the future of the community as well? So we'll start maybe with Chris, because Malcolm, I know you've been talking for a while with the questions.
Yeah, I think it's a rather complicated question to answer from the diaspora standpoint, mainly because the diaspora is not so united as we try to present ourselves, particularly in our political thought, and particularly when it comes to the Israel-Palestine situation. I think Israel's military support to Azerbaijan, which is well known within the Armenian community, um, has skewed Armenian thought in that regard. That I'd often find myself that older Armenian generation, particularly in the West, finds itself being more quote unquote pro-Israel, rather than what I see now, a younger generation, as we see it with trends in America and also across Europe, learning more about the Palestinian cause and sympathizing more with that. The question is also further complicated, and Malcolm, please correct me if I'm wrong, because the old city of Jerusalem, and particularly the Armenian Quarter, finds itself in East Jerusalem, which technically, according to international law, should be part of the Palestinian capital if a two-state solution upon 1967 borders is implemented. And so, my personal opinion, of course, is whatever the majority of the population of the Armenian Quarter feels is beneficial to them, that is what should be implemented. Um, so, again, it's complicated. We have these two pressures. We have the Israelis, um, certain parts of the Israeli sector, the settler sector, the Xana capital sector, which is coming to the Armenian Quarter to intimidate, as Malcolm said, with dogs, with armed guards, with young settler youths coming with sticks and beating on the residents. And on the other side, you have the corruption and the poverty that exists within the Palestinian Authority, and the fear perhaps that there is less upward mobility if this quarter, if its population was then to find itself in a Palestinian state, which, I mean, according to all peace plans put together by the US superpower, would be completely surrounded by Israel and cut off and economically very harsh and unviable. So I think from the diaspora, we try not to focus too much on what a final solution would look like, as much as we try to just advocate for the immediate needs of the Armenian Quarter, which is, again, to have this land deal rescinded, to have it passed through Israeli courts, that it was actually signed without permission of the residents who might lose their houses and their land. And so again, that is what the focus is on. And I think anything that happens to the future of the quarter should be in the hands of the residents of the quarter.
Thanks, Chris. I'll leave it Malcolm for your response.
So the question, Kyle, is how do Armenians deal with their future to stay here?
Well, yeah, I think what are the aspirations, or how do Armenians in the quarter, in light of all of the challenges, how do you envision the future, and what is the hoped for, solution, I guess?
First, I want to say thank you, Chris, also for commenting and beautifully being humble, saying to correct you. Of course, there's nothing to correct you. Amazing. I would say this about aspirations. Because we're a minority, we've existed throughout history here. On one main layer, we existed through being a non-interventionist or a non-interfering type of minority throughout history in geopolitics. With every empire that came here or governance, we built good relations with those who are governing as much as we could, at least our leadership historically, and we didn't really go and take sides because we were very afraid we'd vanish in a moment because we're a very small minority. I think the Armenians still hold into this mindset to a certain extent. And thus, before I say direct aspirations, I will have to say the background of how aspirations work and where they're coming from. So Armenians would, at least of Jerusalem, would see themselves focusing so much on our Armenian issue without connecting it much to the wider context. At least not doing that much, like keep it to a minimum. Rather, connect, say, we have an Armenian presence, we have an Armenian Quarter, we should be protected. Rather than, it's also Palestinians, it's also this, it's also that, it's also Christians, it's also even Armenians here, part of like the struggle. Some were refusing the presence of supporters from other. Some were resisting to that, even Christians resisting some Israeli left-wing activists, anti-occupation activists. They're not welcoming them at all, but they're not like, okay, we want to keep it Armenian only. So the aspiration from that comes with simply, let's stay. The hope comes if we stay long enough, if we prove our presence, maybe we will have a victory, so to speak. If I want to speak further, other layers of aspiration, so Armenians are holding into the spiritual identity now, more than the ethnic one. Because, hey, we are preserving Christianity. And that's a bigger cause, as it seems, that Armenians are using in order to say, we're part of the Christian history. Who can uproot the very Christian First Nation? Who shall uproot? So we Armenians would say, some of us are using this argument to magnify, to like put on to enlarge how much abuse we're facing. Like, this is not only about, hey, the land is taken from us and physical property. Hey, we are Armenian, we're preserving history, we're preserving whole culture, preserving whole Christianity and faith of the largest faith in the world, 2.8 billion Christians. What are you doing here? And so this is one of where aspirations are coming from. Those are angles. That's how the Armenian community is functioning today, at least, as far as I know. There's different voices, but that's the mainstream voice. And as Chris was saying, if majority says he referred to Palestine, Israel as a state, that's even a bigger issue now, which is how do they aspire? Armenians are not really thinking of that. Which state are we going to be of, Palestine or Israel? That's not a foundational stone to Armenians today or even of yesterday. That's an idea that intellectual Armenians think about of Palestine, such as Albert Aghazarian, our professor who passed away a few years ago. They even used to call him the Palestinian, okay, because of how much he had human rights discourse, obviously criticizing Israel more than anything. So shall I, Kyle, add my own opinion about aspirations? How should Armenians maybe aspire, or that's enough? Because I want to respect the time also and the question where it goes. I just explained where the community is.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful, and we do have some audience questions, so maybe we can get to those. And if you want to offer any final remarks, you're welcome to do so. So I think I'll just read both of the questions and then invite Malcolm and Chris as you would like to respond to them. So I think there was one question in the chat sort of around misinformation and what sort of the biggest uh, how sort of misinformation is spread. And so in the terms of what's happening to the Armenian population in the Armenian Quarter in Jerusalem, do you see sort of one example of how misinformation has fueled is being fueled, and um, what is especially most frustrating from Americans, if there's anything in particular? And then the final question I think would be good for us to end on is how can non-Armenians better support and advocate for the preservation of the Armenian Quarter in light of the many challenges it faces? So the first one, misinformation, and then we'll end with sort of what can be done to help support this cause.
Please, Chris, would you like to start?
Sure. I'll address what's frustrating among Americans, perhaps, because since I moved back here to America 6 years ago and have been living here since. I think a lot of what I find is that there are a lot of Americans that care deeply about preserving Christianity, especially in the Middle East, and they wholeheartedly support Israel in the belief that Israel is able to uphold Christianity. But the Armenian Quarter, and to all our participants that didn't attend our other 4 webinars that we had, which showcase again specific cases of Israeli, contrary to international law, detention of Palestinian Christians, it becomes very clear that there is a pattern here of anti-Christian discrimination, whether it be Palestinians or, again, in this case, a non-Palestinian minority that has been residing in the Holy Land for a long time. I think what's most frustrating is if you care about these issues, there's really a deeper level of research to be done to show to speak against what your belief is, and that Israel is the one that is preserving Christianity in the Holy Land. And I think to me that's the most deeply frustrating, because if you truly cared about upholding Christianity in Jerusalem, in the Holy Land in general, then it becomes very clear that there are many local communities that need your vocal support and that need your care support, rather than a blind support for a state that is truly causing these indigenous and ancient communities a great harm on a daily basis. In terms of what non-Armenians can do to support Armenians, I think if you're politically engaged, bring up Armenian issues. I mean, the Armenian issues is tied to any other oppressed peoples around the world. We have a long history of being targeted, and our struggles are interconnected with each other and are deeply rooted with each other. So advocate for Armenians in the space where you talk about oppression, where you talk about liberation. If you're in a space of advocacy, bring up Armenian advocacy, and also simply show up to Armenian protests. I mean, Armenian protests happen multiple times a year. We have many different days that we protest for, whether it be Armenian genocide remembrance, the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, so on and so forth. Show up, support your friends, show your city, your local city, that there is support for this community. And I think that would really go a long way for us.
Thank you.
Thanks. So Malcolm, if you want to close us out, with especially responding, I think, to the how can non-Armenians advocate, but if there's anything on the misinformation you want to share as well, please feel free.
Quickly, misinformation-wise, there's anti-Christianism here. So people speak of anti-Semitism. I know that's a sensitive word, but we use, as Eastern Christians in particular, mistreatment for being Christians. And that's a misinformation that Chris a bit touched, that as if Israel protects minorities or cares about other. No, Christians here, we are pretty mistreated even for our faith or our cultural Christianity. Our crosses are spat at, our priests and clergymen are spat at. That happens all the time because Armenian Quarter is next to the Jewish quarter, to the many, and that's not an exception. Misinformation, that's not exceptional Jews doing this. Not the spitting, but rather the settlers taking over. That's a state policy. Any non-Jew here suffers by policy. And so, but the spitting, yes, it's not, of course, every Jew or majority. No. But that's in general what I want to say about misinformation. How can Armenians better support preservation? Of course, come here. Let's get to know you and visit us. That supports a lot of preservation and speak on our behalf and whatever spoke to your heart in your own country, and come to the Armenian Quarter and see why it's the Armenian Quarter, and so on and so forth. That's part, of course, of preserving, is to speak on our behalf in public and come here and check it out. Come for this cause and see what's happening. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much again, Malcolm and Chris, for being with us this afternoon, morning, depending on where you're at, evening for Malcolm. We're grateful again for this conversation, and then for all of you who are joining us live, but also those that are able to watch this after the fact. So this concludes our time together today, and we encourage you to continue to, while this is the end of this particular webinar series, we will have many other opportunities. So please, if you are not already, make sure that you're signed up for CMEP's email distribution list to make sure that you're aware of the upcoming opportunities, especially, and maybe, I don't know, before we officially conclude, Fail, if you are able to put in the link for our Advent Not Arms campaign, which is the campaign that we are launching as part of this upcoming Advent season to encourage an end to arms sales to Israel and to focus on peace and efforts that will bring about a peaceful end, especially to the situation right now in Gaza, but to the whole region as well. And so look to that website for more opportunities over the coming weeks. And we are again grateful for you being with us all today. Thank you very much.